Here we are. We've got another special guest on the workaround this week. This is Brynne Thompson. She is an investor, an advisor, all around smart and kind person. Also a strategist, as you can see on the whiteboard behind her head. There's lots of fancy charts and graphs back there and business ideas. We'll need to get into what's back there at some point.
For sure.
She works with both everybody from startups to institutional investors. She's a content creator herself. She is a co-host of a podcast called the Coburn Ventures podcast, which I'll send a link to in the show notes on Substack afterwards. And that's how we met. We met through Coburn Ventures, which is a really cool group that studies monumental change in companies, markets, and society to better understand the powerful forces shaping business. And most people there in the group are in business, actively investing, entrepreneurs, corporate leaders, but almost everything we talk to seems to go back to life as well, and things that can apply to both. And that's kind of like a theme of what I talk about and write about here. So this is a good topics ahead. Other fun fact is we both went to Duke University. Go Devils.
So true.
Ready to go, Brynne?
Yeah.
Okay. So our topic today, which you get to go kind of start the ball rolling, is your idea. We talked a few weeks ago about what we should talk about. And you said, how about something I'm thinking about is how to learn in the era of smartphones.
Yeah.
So set that topic up for us. Why do you think it's interesting? Is there something wrong with smartphones? What is that in this era we're in? What does that imply, good and bad?
Oh, such good questions. Okay. Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, Bob, as we spoke about, because I get to work with two different constituents, mainly two, as you mentioned. One are like founders and entrepreneurs, and the other are very long-term investors through Coburn Ventures. And that these are the best investors in the world. And both of those cohorts are really dedicated learners, right? Very student minded. You have to be a good investor, and I think a good entrepreneur founder. You're constantly taking in signal, and it's really your ability to have a unique insight about that creates your success as an investor or a founder, right? These are, by
Yeah.
definition, I think, not herd mentality people.
Yeah. Which you can't to get uncommon results. You have to find something that other people don't generally know that'd be baked into the markets, right?
That's right. That's right. And so one of the things I've been thinking about, so let's stay with investors for a second. So investors have typically been pretty good at handling a lot of information flow. Um, I think of a trading floor. If you've ever been on a trading floor, or even seen the New York Stock Exchange, on TV, it's like a big neural network, right? There's tons of data and information flowing. There's noise, there's lights, there's people yelling, people throwing things. But then the market closes at 4 p.m. Eastern, and you can kind of quit that caricature of this like phenom that takes in data and information and makes decisions on it, and you can eventually go home. So that's what it used to be like. Right?
Mm-hmm.
When I think of today's world, I kind of think of it as like we're all plugged in to this neural network all the time.
Hmm.
So I'm really interested in how investors have been porting over learnings from already being in this fast-paced, dense information flow world into, today's world where we're all in a very big neural network, I would
Mm-hmm.
say, of learning and information.
What's
So
yeah? What do you have so far? What's maybe one of the different ways that we can learn in this always on world?
So I think the first thing is, and just one other note about how different those environments are. Let's just like lay the context of what we're working with here. The financial markets are regulated, and again, like we were saying, the market does shut down. Even that changed when Asia stocks became really important, and everything like that. The market did become a global thing, but at least you probably had responsibilities that ended at some point during the day.
Mm-hmm.
So there was regulation, though, you're not supposed to be able to game it, right? And there isn't supposed to be like an overlord who sucks all the profits and nobody else can participate. We have so many laws, and like there's a lot of structure around it.
Mm-hmm.
When we step into like the media world and things that we're accessing on our smartphone, they're not as regulated.
Mm.
We have freedom of speech, which is a great thing, but extremely complicated. And sometimes we say there can be no regulation. You can say anything. A lot of the laws that we did have, not a lot of people know that there was in the US, there was a public television regulation that said that a certain amount of programming geared toward children had to be educational.
Hmm.
I don't remember what the
Mm-hmm.
percentage was, but like there was this formula, so you got things like Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street. And if it was going to be on a certain time, it had to follow that.
Sure.
Well, when you have over the top media and everything, all of that is gone. So you don't have even some of the core concepts that had learning built in are now routed around completely.
Mm.
So I think that context is helpful in terms of what we're working with. And we also have businesses in which they've been studying, mental models and how our minds work and our psychology, and they're way, way, way ahead of us,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're porting into something that is already kind of using how we interact
Mm-hmm.
with the smartphone, with the different media companies on that phone, way more complicated than what we even understand that they're doing with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like Marshall McLuhan was this media theorist in the 60s and 70s, and he talked about data banks, which I believe were just the very early stage computers and stores of information. But he would say that the more data banks record about each one of us, the less we exist.
Hmm.
And so there's this kind of dehumanizing aspect of it when we're playing a game that we can't win or we don't know how to win.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if I want to be focused on learning and how I'm taking information and moving it up to something insightful, I think that's the first thing. I have to understand the context I'm in, and that I'm already like behind what a lot of the modalities that are on my smartphone are able to, how I'm able to use it. I'm sort of already handicapped.
So you're kind of bringing a knife to the gunfight.
I think so. Sometimes, and
Yeah.
I think it. We'll talk about this, but I think it depends on how we all use it. We still have really awesome human capabilities that have nothing to do with the smartphone. So that's something I've been thinking about.
Well, is there an example of how now that you kind of come into that knowing that the tech companies, let's say, and the people who leverage them with a lot more information than you may have, how are you adjusting, either going on the offense or defense?
Right. Like, how do we live with it, and how do we make sure we're still learning?
And profit from it, and
Yeah.
come up with new insight, all the good stuff as well as the defense, I guess.
Well, so here I have a few ideas, and then I would love to hear also a little bit more about what you do. But I
Yeah.
think the main thing is to go back to our really core human abilities, right? So one is collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, like this is the thing that when humans do it, it's phenomenal, right? This is where the solutions lie to almost every societal problem, intellectual problem. When we collaborate, we go very, very far,
Mm-hmm.
and in non-linear ways, right? And in ways that no one can predict. So collaboration is like this human superpower. And I think that's why all of this, by the way, it's mixed in. Like I remember the first time I was on Facebook and I was like, this is amazing. I always actually did want to reconnect with that person in second grade or whatever, and that was there with each one of these modalities and mediums. There is a way in which our strengths are present as well as our weaknesses. So that's, again, this is why I think like having this conversation with you and stepping back and flushing these things out is the starting point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And is
Mm-hmm.
the major tool that we can use. So So that's one, is collaboration and just really seeing how we can do more of that. One thing that I noticed sort of the last 2 quarters of 2024, there may have been a lot of political events going on. And the thing that gets in the way of collaboration most commonly is fear. And so that's the other
Yep.
human thing, right?
Mm.
Fear kills collaboration,
Mm.
but collaboration is usually the only way that we can assuage whatever concerns that are behind the fear.
Yep.
So, yeah. So, I mean, the how we learn and how we use this media, I think that's one of the constant questions that I'm always asking is like, am I collaborating on this? Am I getting ideas and inspiration to collaborate that I
Mm.
will bring back to, some sort of learning community that I'm in, whether it's like the investors or the entrepreneurs? And then what's going on with my level of fear after I interact with these things? And
Interesting.
oftentimes for me, it's not good.
Yeah. Yeah, you hit on a couple things. I want to maybe circle back to the groups a little bit,
Mm.
but I think that point of fear, I totally resonate with. You know, we we've got to fight fight what's going on. It's um, for me the biggest thing is like maybe we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but I'm just cutting out input.
Yeah.
I literally like pruning and choosing. And for me, it really started after the 2020 election, where it was all said and done. And, for the 4 years before that election, I was looking on news apps every day, and
Yeah.
it was like the hobby that I gave me no pleasure.
Yeah, that's right.
And I kind of woke up and was like, why am I letting myself be fodder for the business model, both sides, and I'm getting texts, and you give a couple dollars to a certain campaign and suddenly you're getting 25 texts a day,
It's so true.
all with language to scare the hell out of you
Yeah.
of the other side might win. And, you know, it's like, I gotta control my own mind. Like this is not good. By the way, neither side, whatever they say, that it doesn't turn out as bad as they say. I'm realizing that as well. Like, oh, it's just the fear, lever getting pulled and pulled. So it's kind of like cut off news apps, cut off social media feeds. And that was a couple years later. And in the social media feeds in particular, it's on TikTok, like all those little spare moments in the day, in
Mm.
TikTok. It's interesting. I mean, it's not it's more addictive than traditional social, which is what your friends are doing.
Yeah.
It's here's the coolest, scariest, wildest stuff, that human beings have done in the past week. And it's interesting as hell, but it's like a candy, like you feel, ugh, what did I do
It's like
here?
junk food.
Junk food for your mind. And again, marketers have been selling junk food for a long time. I'm a marketer, didn't sell junk food. Well, some of my companies have done some ads or things, but we're kind of like, I think whoever invented that link to junk food, you got to give them some kind of a Nobel Prize, because it's an example of helping us understand and make those adjustments and go, yeah, other things are bad for us. Um, but the thing that's most interesting is kind of getting my life back, but
Hmm.
also trusting that news will find me. And I had a really
Uh,
interesting thing a couple of weeks ago, I guess, when I was getting beers with some old friends. We kind of get together every month, and someone goes, "Oh, what do you think about that United Healthcare shooting?" I was like, "What? Oh, you haven't heard about that?" I mean, it might have been 2 or 3 days before,
yeah.
and I did not know. And maybe socially, I felt a little awkward, but my friends know I'm on this anti-news thing by now. But it was interesting. Like, I got to hear about it from people I know and trust.
Hmm.
It wasn't just a quick news alert and following 2,500 news alerts. It was them describing what happened. I was able to see it without reacting in that way and have a more open mind. I think even going into it that way of,
Yeah. Was there any downside or detriment to you for not knowing about that shooting right when it happened?
No. I
right?
mean,
We don't even
again,
ask
maybe a little
ourselves that
social
question anymore.
awkwardness that I'm
Yeah.
way past. But yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Like not seeing that instant thing, did that, I mean, and that's kind of one of my a little trick I do. Another one is like, if I have gotten sucked into the vortex of let's call it world news stress,
Mhm.
take the dog outside, look up into the sky, look around at my city, and go, everything's okay. You know,
Yeah.
we're gonna
It's
live.
like a
You know, there's
moment
no
to
nuclear missiles flying through the air. You know,
no, not that we can see right
no
now.
zombies coming down the street.
That, it sounds like you took a moment to rehumanize, right?
Say
I
more.
mean, well, I guess I'm going back to the Marshall McLuhan quote, and it's eh, by the nature of interacting with a lot of these systems where we're really pronating, maybe over pronating onto a system that likes our attention, that likes us buying things, and that is serving up not to. I know you're a marketer and have been a marketer and know a lot of marketers, but that's the brilliance of it, right? That marketing is, what is your aspiration and can I meet that with a product or service?
Hmm.
That's a nice pure objective. I think we're just in a state right now where, I'll just take myself as an example, I don't always know what my aspiration is, or my aspiration is kind of guided by what I'm seeing anyway on
Hmm.
TikTok or whatever
Hmm.
it is. And so I'm met with more and more kind of faux aspirations or empty aspirations. And then I do the thing, I participate in buying the product or service, and then it's more and more empty. This is
Mm.
not a new problem, right?
No.
Not at all. It's just more that I think, again, we're not as aware of our participation in the system, or rather, just that when I go to check the news, I'm getting a lot of other things are happening to
Mm.
me,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
By virtue of that. And there's a lot of materialism, there's a lot of consumerism that you really have to have a discipline to push back against. My daughter is 12, and we gave we allowed her to put the Amazon app on her phone
Uh-huh.
because there were things that she needed and wanted, and I was like, you know what, let's see what happens here.
This will
um,
be a very expensive test.
a couple of things have been so interesting. One, my favorite is that her, like, if you go into her part of the bathroom, it's just a facsimile of what I now see on Amazon, because you know how like your Amazon page is tuned to what you've been buying and what
Sure.
you've been looking at. Well, our daughter is the one who spends time watching those Amazon videos. And so all of our recommendations are every form of skincare
Okay.
and, different like body perfumes and things like that. And so the things that she buys are really just, it's almost as if someone set up a studio for one of those ladies on Amazon, and
Mm.
it's now in my daughter's bathroom.
Hmm.
But the second thing is, so the one thing I said to her, and so this goes into like, how do we live with it? The one thing I said to her was, okay, I see that you're putting a lot of things in the shopping cart. And there's this thing you can do called save for later.
Uh-huh.
Take a day. I think at this time I only said a day. Like, take a day, maybe two, and then come back.
Yeah.
And then see if that's
Cooling
really how
down
you want
period.
to spend your money. Because it doesn't, it's not her little green light account number is in there. She's supposed to be buying it, not us. It's her allowance money, right?
Okay.
So that was one little constraint or discipline or system that we put in that has her learning,
Hmm.
right? Going back to like our omni topic here, it doesn't always take much to say, have that pause and say, okay, no, actually, and I think that's her default now, is instead of things going in the cart, they go into save for later, and then she'll
Hmm.
look at it another time and make her decision.
Hmm. You know,
Um,
it's something I was just reading a book. It's a David Brooks book called The Social Animal.
yeah,
And have you read it?
I have.
Oh,
Yeah. So
I
good.
always remember there's a chapter. Um, he talks about, and it's just a hard book to describe, but it's just a really interesting way to talk about all the things we should know about ourselves and human nature, told in kind of a parable. I don't know, but something I just read the other day was this idea that when we make decisions, there's recognizing, kind of like becoming aware of it. There's something
Mm.
on offer, thinking about it, rational. Is this a good time? Should I buy this or not? And then like willpower, to live with that decision.
Oh yeah.
And most of humanity, we've talked about either being better at being rational, and we're serving people, here's why you shouldn't smoke, you're going to get cancer. Or we
Mm-hmm.
say, let's get the willpower, let's get a bunch of people who are trying to quit smoking together, and all these social supports and
Yeah.
streaks and all these things. And he makes a great point that actually those are way too hard. We got to get to the first recognition. And can we change our program so that we don't have to make a decision or willpower? It just goes away. So I guess what I'm
Right.
saying is I'm not even using the nose. I recognize
Yes.
that's trouble, danger there, or your daughter,
Right.
don't just put it here instead of buy it, like that.
Yep.
And then you get over the it's harder to go through the other two steps.
That's funny. That interweaves with something we've been talking about at Coburn Ventures of faux convenience, right?
Hmm.
And faux efficiency. So Amazon's a great example. And I do love many things about the Amazon service, but it's like it's giving me convenience and efficiency. But there are a lot of hidden costs that I also bear, whether it's a lot of crap in my house. It could be just not really understanding the product or service that I bought. So many things, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you mentioned willpower, I like one of the greatest gifts to investors was the Nobel Peace Prize Award for Economics in 2002. It
Uh-huh.
was a guy named Daniel Kahneman, and
Yeah.
the work was on behavioral economics, and in a nutshell, all of the biases that we
Mm-hmm.
investors commit all the time. And every human is committing, and it's part of our decision making biases and our learning biases. So something just like recency bias, like
Mm.
Bob, right before we got on this podcast, I was just reading the news about something happening in Syria, and here's my fully formed opinion, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
like this is the right thing, obviously, because this is the news that I have that's the most up to date. There's a lot of potential fallacies involved in whatever my conclusion was that I drew just from
Mm.
reading the very last thing before we got on to talk.
Mm-hmm.
So think just really simple things like that. We all kind of know that we maybe make decisions that are more or less robust at different times. So he really fleshed that out. But in a second piece, he wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. He
Yeah.
goes deep
Great
into
book.
willpower. Have you read
Okay.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he goes pretty deep into willpower. And my takeaway was, okay, I have my willpower tank is full in the morning, and it's going to be less full in the evening. And it just gradually goes down over time, or not really gradually. You use it up based on the
Mm-hmm.
things that need that sort of attention. So my conclusion is systems really, really matter.
Hmm.
Like you're saying, like anything we can do, just like the e-commerce world figured out how to take away friction for our buying process,
Yeah.
what can we do to look at our systems and almost like sometimes add in friction,
Hmm.
right? When we want, but anything we can do so that we don't have to use our willpower to resist something, we
Yeah.
can just change the system.
And your system, are you saying your personal system, or like
Well,
the educational system, the monetary system, the
oh,
investment, financial markets, like, or both?
oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't. No, I was thinking more personal, and
Okay.
for me, it's more of like for an executive team, for investors. What are the ways in which we are? There's a different quality of energy and almost like mental horsepower. So if
Mm-hmm.
we know that, we ought to be doing things a little bit differently. And it
Mm.
can be very personal, right? Like I know there are people who are night owls. I've never been one, but there are, energy waxes and wanes, and it also
Mhm.
depends on what hard things you had to do, that morning. So just being very aware of what are the things that sap a lot of willpower, which could be totally like relational. It could be
Mm.
a super tough relationship you have, and it
Mm.
takes a lot of energy. You have then less for work and for whatever hard decision you're about to make. So being able to look at that a little bit more globally and almost like interdisciplinarily,
Mm. Yeah.
um, I think is really valuable.
Well, I like that. Again, we're this theme of programming yourself, and that
Mhm.
comes from, I mean, we have more knowledge about ourselves now. We
Yeah.
talked about Daniel Kahneman, the whole rise of behavioral economics. When I was at Duke getting my economics degree,
Yeah.
it was kind of like the start of that.
Hmm.
And I had some classes that were the boring macro, micro, but a couple of the professors that were at the early stages of, I had a professor that, did you ever have Professor Havrilesky?
No, no.
Okay.
Great
I'll
surname.
have to send you a post I wrote about him, and
Yeah.
I ended up having a dialogue with his daughter. It was really
Oh,
cool. But
cool.
he taught a class called, it was like social economics,
Mm,
and it was all about how you can take economic principles and supply and demand and apply them to things like college sports, or just about politics and other things. And once you see that, it's like, ooh, there's a whole new world out there, and it seems
right,
more useful than the classic approach.
right. Understanding how irrational we can be
Yeah,
and how systems form that, right? Like rational and irrational decision making in different contexts.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me throw out another thing I'm doing: personal
Yeah.
reprogramming. So I've saved all this time off social media and news apps.
Yeah.
There's an area that I am consuming 5 times as much content in this, digital era as I
Okay.
used to, and that's long form. And I based one of the rules I wrote for myself is I'm not paying attention to anything unless it's long form. And
Could
that could
that be
be,
like a long essay, a
you
book,
got it.
any?
So
Yeah.
essay, Substack,
Hmm.
YouTube videos, not shorts,
Right.
like, half
The
hour, one
full.
hour, 3 hour YouTube videos, podcasts,
Yep.
research papers.
Oh, wow.
Um, and I think it does. And one of the reasons that triggered me on this one was, are you familiar with the investor Paul Graham? Who
Yes.
started Y Combinator. He writes these amazing, smart essays,
Hmm.
and sometimes he gets on Twitter or X.
Yeah.
He is brilliant in his essay and sounds often like an idiot on X, because it just, and by the way, if I was to respond, I would look dumb,
Yep.
because that small number of characters, you can't make a good point. It's a throwaway. You read it in
Yeah.
the worst impression or the best, like it's not thoughtful.
No,
So I just
there's
said,
no
like, I'm off
nuance.
that. There's no nuance. So I think long form, A, you don't seem stupid.
Yeah.
B, it forces the writer to think,
Yeah.
which is what writing is
So
really
hard.
thinking.
Mhm.
It shows the writer cares.
Mm,
So a throwaway, versus
right.
hours, thinking through something. Okay, this must really matter if Paul wrote an essay about it versus
Yep.
some tweet about COVID. Um, and it's just like that richer experience, I think has been really helpful for me.
It probably takes some of the emotion out of it too. Like I find short form is either kind of
Mm.
um, just so stripped down that it's really bland or so highly emotional. And I've never read an essay or a book that is like taking it to 11 the whole way through, right?
Yeah.
You can't do that. And no one would read it. It'd be so exhausting.
Okay. Can I throw another concept on you?
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. Let me see what you think of this. I don't know if have you heard of the bow tie model?
No.
Okay. So this YouTube. This is my latest rabbit hole. Is this
Yeah.
this guy named Michael Levin. I think he's University of Tulane or something. I don't know if he's a physicist, philosopher, both or more.
Yeah.
But he and I'll put a link to this in the notes and send it to you as well. But he talks about this bow tie model as like a key part of how information moves in evolution and news and everything else today. Like there's all, we're walking down the street and there's a massive amount of sensorial input that could come into us.
Yeah.
But it's inefficient to capture it all. So our memories become like this tiny compressed file of just, any situation. All we get is this like tiny little compression thing. And then when we look back at what happened yesterday, or even one of the biggest moments of your life, your current brain has to unpack that file.
Oh.
And it makes all kinds of leaps and jumps and changes. So like if you retell the story of your daughter and the makeup, today, but 20 years from now, you're going to unpack that file and have your brain and your experiences and age and everything else will be so much different. You would tell a different story to me based on unpacking that file into, what your program is then. And so similarly, I think, by the way, I've been looking for excuses to launch this into our conversation. I'm so excited about it. But
you do seem excited.
You said something about emotion that I think resonates with this too. Is a tweet is that compression file of whatever was someone's brain. Paul Graham has this big thought about whatever.
Yeah.
About the United Healthcare CEO, let's call that.
Right.
He's got a bunch of smart thoughts of his life and experience that if he was to compress down to a handful of characters, it loses all that fidelity.
Yeah.
And then we read that tweet and then we unpack it and it doesn't have much. And so emotion is something we have and it's very powerful.
Yeah.
And so our brain just shortcuts to he's brilliant or he's an asshole.
That's right.
Whatever.
There's no thinking.
Yeah. And there's it's not going to help us make some insight. No. It's going to just piss us off and love Paul more or hate Paul more, which is meaningless because we don't know the guy, but that's so I like the emotional, like just, this person here, I can chill, I can settle. Like I'm reading,
you can actually take in an idea.
Yeah.
Right. Do you take any notes while you read? Do you ever do that? Yeah.
How about you? What do you do?
I do. I don't have a good system after that. I don't have an organizing system for my notes. So I have notes, but whether or not they then are formed into cohesive, helpful ideas down the line is left a little bit more up to chance than I would like. And my brain's memory and aptitude.
Well, two things. I mean, one thing is another learning point to throw at you, which you're doing and you might not know it. So you may have a system that you're just not thinking about, which is...
That would be a great gift to me. If you reveal something, I can't wait.
You're a content creator. You're a writer.
Yeah.
That forces you to think. And I guarantee you some percentage of your day is spent thinking about what are we going to do in this next podcast?
That's true.
And whether you write that down or not, that's like percolating and parts of your brain are grabbing this and that and looking, whether it is a feed or a newspaper or stuff that comes in your inbox, like your subconscious is looking for pieces that it could pull into that. And so that's like something that I would say is now that I'm writing weekly, have been for almost 2 years, like I'm forced to, like I have a learning need, because I have an audience.
So your brain knows where to file things because you have an output.
Well, yes. And I also have some other structures.
That's good.
The biggest thing I do, so now take or leave these tips, but two big things. First, I've got for reading, most of my, significant reading is on books on Kindle.
Okay.
And I highlight using the Kindle app on my iPad, and I
Yeah.
write notes too.
Okay.
And then once I finish a book, you can go to like a special Kindle page and it will show you all of your highlights and notes.
Oh.
So then I print those. Sometimes it's right after the book. Sometimes it's a year or two later. I've got like, I don't know, there's a bunch of book notes.
Oh, that's
that I've got.
fantastic.
So it's like a Reader's Digest version, and then I'll like go back and I have a personal philosophy document that's a
Yeah.
long story. But like for posts for my Substack, I'll go through those old books, and I have another like 200 pages of outlines of post ideas. And
And
sometimes
did
it'll
those
be
come
like,
just throughout your day? Like when you're struck
yeah,
with an idea, you
yeah.
sketch a quick outline.
I've turned several people onto this. So here's an unpaid ad for an app called Brain Toss.
That's a great name.
It's the number one app on my phone.
Brain Toss.
Upper left corner, you hit it, and you can leave yourself a message,
Okay.
type a thing, or take a picture, and it goes to your inbox.
Oh, that's cool.
So I know people use all kinds of different things, but for me, like my inbox, I'm an inbox zero guy, so like that's my to-do list. And between like Kindle notes and those ideas that spark me around the day, then I'm like, okay, I need to.
So that's how you can
Put that
funnel
somewhere.
your information
Yeah.
flow into the outputs that you want.
And so, and I've got, some of those posts I'll never do. Others are
Right.
like going to be grand, giant ones, and then those little pieces, it's kind of building up the idea. And then when I go do a post, I'll often like take that outline and that'll be the start. Like, so it's kind of like pre-thought.
So would you say, do you have a curriculum you're following? Like when you start to get interested, say in like The Social Animal by David Brooks, like do you have some concurrent reading that you wrap around that? Like how do you choose your inputs? That's something we talk about all the time with investors. Like what are you actually reading? Investors will, well, I think everyone, if I surveyed of like a Coburn Ventures client, they probably read the Wall Street Journal every day, or at least some of it. But you have to be very careful that then that just doesn't lead you to the same conclusions of everyone else and herd mentality. So it's like really helpful to have your own curriculum sort of based on the key investment questions that you need answered. So how do you do it? Do you wrap around other sources and media around the same topic, or?
Let's start with a basic one. Is I feel like over the years, something that's been helpful for me is if I'm trying to learn about a new topic, like a few months ago, we made an investment in a new company around the field of revenue operations.
Okay.
It's kind of, using data to link together sales and finance and client success and marketing to make database decisions about sales forecasting and territory setting and stuff. And I didn't know enough to invest. And so I spent a couple days Googling a bunch of stuff, finding a bunch of articles, and just sit down and read.
Deep study.
Print and underline. And like at the end of that, I'm like, then I write my own kind of summary. This is what this is about. I've done this enough time. It goes back to marketing. This goes back to doing startups, like back to college, where you got to learn really quickly. That's been effective for me. Like when I have a topic right now, I've got a topic idea around, future posts, maybe 2025 is I'd love to have what's like a modern code of like a Bushido code of business.
Oh, cool.
or a chivalry of business. Like, I think that's something needed in society. And I've got like 4 books planned to read about historical warrior codes and things like that. So I'll go read that when I'm like ready to go. But here's my newest thing. Give this a try. And listeners at home, try this. Now, like I finish a book and I have a list of books to read and wish list, and I will sit there and go, okay, what should I read? And I let my subconscious pick it. Like I just kind of go, and so
You
it
go by
works.
feel,
It's
like a gut.
crazy. It's beyond me.
Yeah.
It's unconscious, processing, whatever it is. But like the David Brooks came at the perfect, like I keep reading these books. It's like, this is exactly the one I should be
Yeah.
reading now. And it's got links to what I read before, and it'll, go to the next one. So
This is where
it's
I
like a,
wish I knew more about the subconscious, because I think something that we're kind of talking around here is like almost like taking care of your subconscious. I used
mhm.
to, about 10 years ago, or maybe it was maybe a little bit earlier, because I was in New York City a lot more. And I remember jokingly coming into work and almost like reciting headlines that I'd seen, whether it was like through Times Square or riding in the elevator or whatever, you just, or the ticker tape on CNBC, like you just feel like you know the information now by
Mm,
walking past it, right?
mhm,
And that, so I refer to it as headline osmosis, right? Like
mm.
I'm not even reading anything. It's like that Tom Cruise movie Minority Report. I don't know if you
Mhm.
remember the scene where he's walking through the mall and the ads are tailored
Yeah,
directly to him. It was supposed to be
yeah.
so futuristic, but I feel it's like really
Mr. Anderson, you need a Heineken. Yeah.
yeah, it was great. So like our world is kind of like that. We take all these things in by osmosis. We take in a lot of information by osmosis. And it happens like if I go onto Instagram, right? Like there's no end to the different brands that sell women's dresses that I'm going to see. And somehow
Mhm.
I know of all of them and I have an opinion of all of them. I don't need any of that in my brain. I don't,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so being a little bit more careful about like what I'm exposing my subconscious to, because like you were saying, that's such a big, we know it's powerful. We don't know how or why. And, but when you talk about decision making,
Mhm.
I think it deserves a lot of respect, right?
Well, I think that yeah, the respect of it, and it's. I love the. I mean, this might go back to Buddhism or something, but the concept of a horse and a rider,
Yeah.
and our the rider is like our conscious self, but that's only and science is proving that's. I mean, it's barely holding any rein at all. I
Yeah.
mean, we're like some neuroscience and or philosophers and or spiritual leaders would say you got no control. Like your
Yeah.
conscience is just along for the ride,
Right.
to tell a story later. But let's
Totally.
assume there's some control. Um, that horse is getting distracted. I mean,
Yeah.
and guess what? Horses are herd animals. We
Yeah.
are herd animals, and so
Yeah.
it's out there with this programming of wanting to just your example of fit in socially.
Mm-hmm.
So coming across posts about what's this year's style or what are my friends doing on vacation, all these very powerful social systems that we have that are the conscious doesn't even need it. Like that's the whole
Yeah.
point is the conscious takes a break because we're trusting our subconscious
So true.
to survey our surroundings and tell us what to buy and where to live and how to behave. um,
Yeah. I think like at some point here, I guess we would have to introduce the idea of the unconscious, right? And that's a
yeah,
little bit of how the feeling that I get. That's like the junk food feeling that I get when I'm taking in information and so-called learning on platforms that aren't really that helpful. Um yeah, and there's almost like a to flip the script on this, again, just going back to like, well, okay, so how do we learn in today's world? Um in the context of it being a little bit of a wild, wild west, right? There's almost like I love how you said pruning, right? We can play, like I've the the phrase like play with the media instead of it playing us, so
yeah,
uh, I don't know. My son took off Snapchat off his phone for a week because it was finals week, and I'm like, good for you. Like you realize like it will always be there for you
yeah, yeah.
if you want to go back. And it doesn't really care that you're gone. So how do you feel? Like what did you miss? Did you miss anything
Mm,
really?
mhm.
Um, the answer was he missed a lot of drama that he was happy to miss. So that's just a plain experimenting, collaborating. Like you said, the social thing is kind of solved if we're doing like what we are doing right now is just talking about it, playing with it. Hey, what do you do? What do I do? That's a great way to just keep learning and have that stance of, I want to stay human. I don't want to be used by a system that just wants me to buy stuff or, gets in the way of real learning and having insight. For so many people, that is their job. They need to be coming up with insightful ideas and do something different. Otherwise, everything's just bland and the same, and will eventually get commoditized. So I think this is more of a survival issue than we think. And it's really nice to be playing with it. Feels like you can just take on the attitude of being pioneering, and say like, no, this is how I'm going to learn. And it's going to be all long form. And then once a month, I'll dive in and just see if I can get inspiration from whatever platform or anything like that,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Well, I really like, you start off and you mentioned here again the idea of the positive, community and other people and using that as a way to like filter input. And I think that's one of the things that's been a real effective as productive, let's call it, as well as joyful, is being in this Coburn Ventures group.
Yeah.
Which it's a mix. It's fascinating seeing the mix of investors who are not just reading the Wall Street Journal, like they're looking for big picture stuff. It's an eclectic group. It's got a bunch of people like the two of us that are not necessarily hardcore investors, and we're doing other things in life. And every time we have one of those meetings, I come away like thinking differently and discovering new topics and new types of people that I don't, it's like way outside of, a lot of our normal bubbles.
Totally.
Which has just been great.
It's like, where are the spaces where you can, I don't know, catapult your growth, right? And that's almost always going to be with other humans.
Yeah. And
I don't think there's a business model behind it.
What do you mean?
I think it would be
that would hurt it.
Yeah. Just to take Coburn Ventures as an example, you've been to a lot of the gatherings that the group does, and a lot of people have said, why don't you charge more or charge this and that? And to Pip's credit, because I remember at a time when I was like, yep, yeah, why don't we, Pip? That seems like a great idea. And he knew it would impinge on what was being built, and like going back to nonlinear outcomes. We didn't know exactly what was being built, right?
Yeah.
But we knew what would get in the way of it.
I love that, especially at a time when, how are we going to monetize? How are we going to, that seems to be the focus of even the good stuff. But I think go ahead.
It can be very dehumanizing. Again, like, I think it's just interesting to look at all the ways in which, like, all of the interactions that are really transactions, and that's no good.
Well, I feel that sometimes one of the things I do, like I have a pretty good habit of trying to have conversations with strangers, different people. And so I do outreach to new people on LinkedIn all the time. And if they do something positive other than just accept a connection, say, hey, let's get on Zoom. I'd love to hear what you're doing. And or I have on Substack, I've got like an open office hours link that people click on. But sometimes those meetings, I'm like, oh, this person, like we're jiving, we're connecting, and then they're turning it into a sales pitch.
I was going to say, and then they want to sell you something.
I know. Come on, man.
But like, you can't blame them, right? That's our whole like model of being a good citizen these days seems to be like, do you make money? It's
Yeah.
really so.
Is that changing at all? I mean, we're going way off the original topic, but
I
it's good.
know.
Where are we
No.
going? Or it's
No,
getting
I don't
worse?
think so. No, I think it's that's so interesting. So I don't know, like, over the arc of the next few generations. I think there's super, super interesting pushback. You and I are doing that right now. I mean, it's not like radical or anything. We're just like, wait a
Yeah.
second, how is all this stuff sloshing around in our brain? Is it useful? Is it not? What am I trying to do here? Those are just very, very basic questions that you don't have to ask yourself. A lot of people do not, because there is this easy measure, which is like, well, how much did I get paid? Or how much can I extract out of the system?
Yep.
So those things don't really seem to have a competing philosophy right now. And I'm just
Mhm.
speaking for like the United States. I haven't been doing a lot of global travel and will not like um, make any assumptions about that.
Yeah.
Um, so no, like there's Dean Kamen, who he was an inventor. He said, you know, you get what you worship.
Hmm.
Um, and we worship, you know, who do we worship? Who gets the headlines? It's Bezos and all these other people, right? That's
Elon. Yeah.
yeah. So it's not surprising what we get.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't have an answer for that. I'm not saying like we need to like go back to I don't know what era that never was, right? Where humans had this down, you know, and
Yeah.
we were all communities were awesome and everyone was flourishing. Like, nope.
Yeah.
we're just we're again just like pioneers plodding along across the frontier yet again, right?
Yeah. I think there's something to your point that I noticed like this, like, oh, it's going to be a sales pitch of, and maybe this is a trying to pull a positive out of a negative, but we are much more street smart today. And I
Mm.
think my kids, especially, like they know, like they see the games, like they see, they're just trying to, take an extra buck out of this. And,
Mhm.
we, our spidey senses to
Yeah.
what's the business model trying to use me here are much more finely tuned. And, maybe that helps us defend, but at the same time, it can kind of, you know, put up walls all the time that we wish weren't there.
Yeah. You know, I think A, that's really awesome and very hopeful. And B, humans love teaching one another, right?
Hmm.
I think like that's what we do very naturally in conversation, in our actions, even like again, like a little bit more subconsciously. Like think of how little humans learn, right? They're learning by osmosis
Yeah.
completely. Um, so that's we will teach each other and we will model behaviors that work or don't. And that's going to be borne out over time, I think, of like who um, how we handle the struggle, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, and that is the positive, the topic is learning, and that's what human beings are. I mean, if nothing else, learning
yeah.
machines, and we pass learning forward. I love your point. Like we love to teach.
Hmm.
There's a phrase of like, if you ever want to learn something, teach it to someone else that helps you learn. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, you know, like it's like we're at this time where it seems like we're really, really invested in what other people are doing. And
hmm,
maybe we're seeing some of the negative sides of that, but um there could be amazing positives. Like there's something really great about that, about being so tuned in to like how's everybody doing? How's everyone in Florida doing? How's everyone in Syria doing? Like and how are they doing life? You know, and how is I'm gonna try vegetarianism because that seems to be working for those people, or you know, whatever it
yeah,
is. Like we are learning machines. We've got this like huge wide aperture because of you know everyone having a smartphone in their pocket.
mhm,
So what can we do with that?
And we are like getting more networked, to use another, you
Mm-hmm.
know, topic you mentioned at the top of this discussion.
Yeah.
Like, we are becoming more global.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going to be pushbacks here and there and rises of nationalism or,
Right.
reaction. But that's, I mean, it's increasingly global every minute. There's more nodes in the global
Yeah.
network that are forming, spreading information and getting a feel for each other. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
what happens in I mean, we just could be at a really messy stage. Like, this is
Yeah.
another writer I love, Ken Wilber, talked about, like, there are stages of
Mm.
human evolution, like social evolution,
Mm.
and you can't go back. It wasn't like,
Mm.
you may say that there was a time of hunting and gathering where everything was wonderful. False. Like, it was never that wonderful. There was
I
slavery,
would
there
be
were human
perished
sacrifice.
already.
Uh, we were jerks to each other at
Yeah.
every stage before now, a lot worse. But we just, we're too many people, which
Yeah.
is a good thing, actually.
Yeah.
Billions of lives, and most lives are net positive. Like, we have to have new structures that fit who we are now and what we know now.
Yeah.
And, we're going to make some mistakes and learn
Yeah.
from the mistakes, I guess.
Yeah. We just have to look out for each other, I think. Learn as we go.
All right. What I'm going to give you the last word. Give us
Oh.
one other tip, one other thing.
Oh my gosh. One other tip.
We got 2025 happening. Any resolutions?
Oh
Are you learning
man.
any new skills?
Yeah. This is a funny one. When I was working in San Francisco in like the early 2000s, that was right when I would get to my desk and I would have access to the internet, right? And that was because, remember how you used to have to pay for dial up in your apartment or whatever? And
Oh,
like,
yeah.
that was a big expense. There was no way I was doing that. So I would get to my desk early, and I would boot up Safari or whatever. And I would check two things: the New York Times, which I thought that was so cool because I was in San Francisco and here I was reading the New York Times. And then I would, this is what it was like, kids. And then
Yeah.
the other thing I would pull up was Le Monde, right? The Paris
Mm.
newspaper. And that was my initial idea that I'm returning to, Bob, which was,
All right.
I was so excited. I was an au pair in France when I was 19. So about 5 years later, suddenly I had access to their paper on a daily basis. And I thought, this is what's going to keep me connected and keep me, practicing my French and learning. And I'll go back so many times and just be like a native. One of the things we haven't talked about today is like how hard learning can be. And that's why we can always just sit back and scroll or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So, this year, that's what I'm doing. I'm just going to read. I've also since tried to add Spanish to my language. So I'm going to just read 2 of the dailies
Oh.
as a morning practice. That'll be my news intake as just a way of like really deterministically learning instead
Mm-hmm.
of absorbing.
So you've picked something you're gonna read two, you said?
Yeah, I
Couple
haven't picked out
pages?
my Spanish paper
What
yet.
time of day?
In the morning.
Every day?
Right, because it's going to take a lot of willpower
It's
to
not
stick with
willpower.
it.
This is the thing.
I
You
may
have to
just say
fight every
one
time.
article to
It's
start.
like, at 9 o'clock, you're gonna
Yeah,
have it open.
yeah,
Like, you just decide that now, and
and
you'll
that's
you'll
it.
get it done.
And like, what would happen if I did that almost every day next year? Something. Don't know what.
If nothing else, a great podcast topic.
And a great year-end
So
goal.
let's check in. We'll check out several times over the year, but I want to check in at least this time next year and
Amazing.
see how that streak is going, and maybe you
Yeah,
could just rattle off everything in French. If you know Spanish, I know some Spanish. I was
we
trying to get
could do
back into Spanish,
a
and
little
my
mixture,
daughter, one of my
mélange.
daughters, took Spanish, and even at the dinner table, she refused. And
Oh,
so,
yeah,
but that's what kids do. They
awesome.
rebel. Well, Brent, thanks so much for joining us today. I love this conversation. I'm going to put your LinkedIn on Substack. Any other things we should know? Anything else you want to plug?
Well, no, I just want to, no, thank you so much. I don't have anything to plug. I'm happy to talk with you. And I think we did it today. We did collaboration, we did learning, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Your dog gets the last word. All right. Thanks again. Ahoy for now.